Imagine lying awake in ancient Rome long after sunset. Your oil lamp is almost empty, the streets outside have gone quiet. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barks, then suddenly stops. You hear voices. Not from the street. From the other side of your wall. Your neighbor is whispering. You freeze. Because in ancient Rome, a careless word could ruin your life. A jealous neighbor could accuse you of a crime, spread rumors about your family, or tell the authorities something you never intended anyone to hear. For many Romans, the people living next door were not trusted friends. They were a constant threat. And that is why countless Romans feared their neighbors more than thieves, more than disease, and sometimes even more than death itself. Rome was one of the largest cities the ancient world had ever seen. At its peak, more than 1 million people crowded into a city never designed for so many inhabitants. Families lived packed together in enormous apartment blocks known as insulae. These buildings were cramped, unstable, and incredibly noisy. Walls were often thin. Floors creaked. Windows stood only a few feet apart. A conversation held in one room could easily become entertainment for several neighboring families. Privacy, something many people today take for granted, barely existed. Every argument, every secret, every financial struggle had an audience. And your audience lived right next door. Many insulae housed dozens of families under one roof. A poor laborer might sleep only a few feet away from a merchant, a freed slave, a criminal, or someone desperate enough to steal. The stairways were narrow. The hallways were dark. The rooms were tiny. People constantly crossed paths. Every day brought opportunities for conflict. A borrowed bucket not returned. A child making too much noise. Smoke drifting through a window. Waste thrown into the wrong corner. Small annoyances could grow into bitter feuds that lasted for years. And unlike today, there was often no authority willing to solve these disputes fairly. One of the greatest fears was gossip. Romans loved rumors. The city thrived on stories, accusations, and scandals. A neighbor who disliked you could damage your reputation with nothing more than a few carefully chosen words. They might claim you cheated customers. They might suggest your spouse was unfaithful. They might whisper that you had debts you could not repay. Soon the story would spread through markets, bathhouses, and taverns. People would repeat it without knowing whether it was true. In a society where reputation determined opportunities, gossip could destroy livelihoods. And the source was often the person living next door. Money created even more tension. Most Romans lived close to poverty. A bad harvest, illness, or loss of work could push a family into desperation. When people struggle to survive, envy grows quickly. If one household suddenly bought better furniture, better clothing, or more food, neighbors noticed immediately. Questions followed. Where did the money come from? Was it earned honestly? Was something being hidden? Suspicion flourished inside crowded apartment buildings. Success often attracted resentment. And resentment could become dangerous. Many Romans learned that displaying wealth openly might invite enemies living only a few steps away. Thefts were common throughout Rome. Locks existed, but many people could not afford strong protection. A neighbor had countless opportunities to observe your habits. They knew when you left for work. They knew when your family traveled. They knew where valuables were stored. Some criminals did not need to break into homes. They simply waited for doors to be left open. Others worked with thieves from outside the building. Information became a valuable commodity. A dishonest neighbor could earn money by revealing exactly when your home would be vulnerable. Trust was a luxury many Romans could not afford. Noise was another source of endless hostility. Ancient Rome never truly slept. Merchants prepared goods before dawn. Animals crowded the streets. Workers carried supplies through narrow alleys. Inside apartment buildings, the sounds became even worse. Bobbies cried. Couples argued. Dogs barked. Tenants moved furniture. Someone was always awake. Someone was always causing trouble. A single loud neighbor could turn every night into misery. Without modern insulation, every sound traveled freely through walls and floors. Many Romans spent years enduring people they deeply disliked but could never escape. Fires made neighbors even more frightening. Roman apartment blocks were notorious fire hazards. Oil lamps, cooking fires, wooden beams, and overcrowded conditions created constant danger. One careless resident could doom an entire building. A forgotten flame, an overturned lamp, a cooking accident. Within minutes, smoke could fill the stairways. Families trapped on upper floors often had little chance of escape. When people heard unusual sounds or smelled smoke from a neighboring room, panic spread instantly. Your safety depended on the caution of strangers living only a few feet away. And many Romans knew those strangers were often careless. Sometimes the danger was intentional. Ancient sources describe disputes escalating into violence. Arguments over property, insults, debts, or personal grudges could turn ugly. A neighbor might damage belongings. They might attack family members. They might gather friends to intimidate rivals. The crowded environment amplified every conflict. There was rarely enough space to avoid someone. Each morning you might encounter the same enemy on the staircase, in the courtyard, or at the water fountain. Hatred could become part of daily life. And in Rome, daily life was already difficult enough. As darkness settled over the city, fear often returned. Behind every wall lived people whose intentions were unknown. Some were honest. Some were desperate. Some were dangerous. A Roman lying in bed could hear footsteps above, voices below, and whispers through the wall beside them. They never knew which neighbor might spread a rumor, steal an opportunity, start a fire, or bring trouble to their door. Tomorrow's greatest threat might not come from a barbarian army, a plague, or a criminal gang. It might come from the person living only a few feet away. And for many Romans, that possibility was terrifying. In ancient Rome, information traveled surprisingly fast. There were no newspapers for ordinary citizens, no telephones, and certainly no internet. Yet somehow, everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. A merchant could wake up respected and go to bed disgraced. A family could spend years building a reputation only to watch it collapse in a matter of days. And often the first spark came from a neighbor who decided to tell a story. Whether true or false barely mattered. Once a rumor escaped into Rome's crowded streets, it became almost impossible to stop. Imagine a Roman craftsman returning home after a long day. He notices people staring. Conversations suddenly stop when he approaches. Friends avoid eye contact. Nobody explains what has happened. Only later does he discover the truth. Someone has accused him of cheating customers. No evidence exists. No witnesses support the claim. Yet the story has spread through the neighborhood. His neighbor heard it first, repeated it second, and helped ensure everyone else believed it. The damage has already begun. Roman society depended heavily on reputation. Unlike modern systems filled with paperwork and official records, much depended on personal trust. Customers chose merchants they respected. Employers hired workers they trusted. Families arranged marriages based on reputation. A rumor could poison every one of these relationships. Neighbors understood this power. Some used it carefully. Others used it as a weapon. The ability to destroy someone's social standing required no money, no authority, and no violence. Only words. And words were abundant in ancient Rome. Apartment courtyards often became rumor factories. Residents gathered to collect water, cook food, wash clothes, or exchange news. What began as casual conversation could quickly become something darker. One person added a detail. Another exaggerated it. A third claimed to have witnessed events personally. By sunset, a completely different story existed. The original facts disappeared beneath layers of speculation. Yet listeners often accepted the newest version as truth. The more shocking the rumor, the faster it spread. And Roman neighborhoods loved shocking stories. Political tensions made matters even worse. Rome was full of rival factions, ambitious politicians, and competing interests. Ordinary citizens frequently discussed public affairs. Neighbors listened carefully. A careless comment supporting the wrong figure could create problems. Someone might accuse you of disloyalty. Someone else might claim you supported dangerous ideas. Even if authorities ignored such accusations, local residents often remembered them. Political disagreements could divide entire neighborhoods. Trust vanished. Suspicion replaced friendship. Every conversation became a potential risk. Women faced their own unique dangers. Roman society placed enormous value on female reputation. A whisper suggesting improper behavior could have devastating consequences. Jealous neighbors sometimes spread stories about secret meetings, forbidden relationships, or dishonorable conduct. Whether these claims were true rarely mattered. The accusation alone could damage marriage prospects and family honor. Many Roman women lived under constant scrutiny. Every movement could be observed. Every interaction could be interpreted. And every observer might become a storyteller. Children often became unwilling participants in neighborhood conflicts. Young boys and girls moved freely through buildings, courtyards, and streets. They heard conversations adults believed were private. They repeated secrets without understanding their importance. Parents feared loose tongues. A child might innocently reveal financial troubles. Another might mention hidden valuables. Some might repeat family arguments to curious neighbors. What seemed harmless could quickly become dangerous. In crowded Roman communities, information leaked constantly. And children were among the most unpredictable sources. The city's bathhouses amplified rumors even further. These public spaces attracted people from every social class. Businessmen, laborers, politicians, and former soldiers gathered daily. Conversations flowed as freely as the water. News traveled rapidly between neighborhoods. A rumor born inside one apartment building could reach distant districts within days. People added details as it traveled. Stories became larger, darker, and more dramatic. By the time information returned to its source, it often resembled a completely different tale. Rome functioned like a giant echo chamber. And neighbors supplied the echoes. Sometimes rumors led directly to violence. A false accusation might trigger a confrontation. A misunderstanding could evolve into a feud. Families chose sides. Friends became enemies. The original issue might be forgotten entirely. Only resentment remained. Ancient writers occasionally described disputes that escalated far beyond reason. A simple insult transformed into years of hostility. The crowded nature of Roman life made reconciliation difficult. People could not simply move away. They continued seeing each other every day. Conflict lingered like a wound that never healed. As night fell over Rome once again, countless conversations continued behind closed doors. Neighbors exchanged stories by lamplight. Some stories were harmless. Others were dangerous. A few could change lives forever. The walls of the city seemed alive with whispers. Every apartment contained secrets. Every family possessed vulnerabilities. And somewhere nearby, another neighbor was listening. Not because they cared, but because information was power. In ancient Rome, that power could be worth more than money, more than friendship, and sometimes even more than the truth itself. For many Romans, the greatest danger was not a stranger lurking in the darkness. It was the person who already knew everything about them. Neighbors observed daily routines without even trying. They knew when families left for work. They knew when merchants returned from the market. They knew who owned valuable possessions and who struggled to survive. In crowded apartment buildings, nothing remained hidden for long. Every habit became visible. Every weakness became known. And sometimes the people gathering this information had no good intentions whatsoever. A Roman laborer might wake before sunrise every day. His routine never changed. He left at the same hour, returned at the same hour. A neighbor watching from a nearby window could memorize his schedule within a week. Soon they would know exactly when his room stood empty, exactly when nobody remained to guard his belongings. Criminals valued such information. Some thieves spent weeks studying targets. Others simply asked neighbors who already knew everything. Information could open doors more effectively than any lock. Many Roman apartments lacked strong security. Doors were often simple wooden constructions. Windows could be vulnerable. Some residents possessed little worth stealing. Others stored savings, jewelry, tools, or merchandise inside their rooms. A dishonest neighbor needed only patience. They could watch where valuables were hidden. Observe where keys were placed. Notice which family members carried money. The closer someone lived, the easier surveillance became. And in Rome, neighbors lived extremely close. Sometimes only a thin wall separated opportunity from temptation. Not every thief worked alone. Ancient Rome contained organized criminal networks. Street gangs operated in certain districts. Burglars saw easy targets. Corrupt individuals exchanged information for profit. A neighbor might never commit the crime personally. Instead, they could quietly inform others. A merchant leaving town. A wealthy widow living alone. A family attending a religious festival. Such details had value. A few coins earned through betrayal could mean several weeks of food. Desperation often outweighed loyalty. Some thefts were shockingly small. A missing loaf of bread. A stolen cloak. A vanished cooking pot. Yet these losses mattered deeply. Many Romans lived close to poverty. Replacing basic possessions was difficult. A single stolen item could create genuine hardship. Suspicion immediately spread through apartment buildings. Residents looked at one another differently. Trust evaporated. Every missing object seemed to point toward a neighbor. Whether guilty or innocent, everyone became a suspect. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Water sources frequently became centers of conflict. Many residents relied on shared fountains and communal access points. Neighbors waited in line together. Arguments erupted over access, priority, and fairness. Sometimes belongings left unattended disappeared. Buckets vanished. Containers changed owners. Accusations followed. Because everyone used the same facilities, identifying the culprit proved difficult. People blamed those living nearby. Old grudges resurfaced. What began as a stolen bucket could develop into a long-running feud affecting entire families. Markets offered another opportunity for betrayal. Neighbors often knew who carried money home after a successful day. Merchants could not easily hide their earnings. A jealous observer might follow them. Others might inform thieves waiting along dark streets. Ancient sources describe crime as a regular feature of urban life. The city never completely escaped it. For criminals, local knowledge created enormous advantages. And nobody possessed more local knowledge than the people living next door. Fear increased during major festivals. Crowds filled the streets. Families traveled. Homes stood unattended for longer periods. Excitement distracted residents from security concerns. Meanwhile, opportunists watched carefully. Neighbors noticed who had left, who remained away overnight, who appeared wealthy enough to target. Celebration for some became opportunity for others. Returning home to discover missing possessions was not uncommon. And victims often suspected someone nearby had provided the necessary information. Even when no crime occurred, suspicion poisoned daily life. A Roman hearing footsteps outside his room at night might immediately imagine a thief. A strange noise could trigger anxiety. An unfamiliar face in the hallway invited concern. People began locking belongings away, hiding money, distrusting neighbors. The constant uncertainty created psychological pressure. No one could be entirely certain who deserved trust. The fear of betrayal became nearly as damaging as betrayal itself. And fear never truly slept in ancient Rome. As darkness covered the city, countless oil lamps flickered behind apartment windows. Some residents prepared for sleep. Others remained awake, listening, watching, waiting. Some worried about thieves. Others secretly planned thefts of their own. The crowded insulae contained every kind of person imaginable. Honest workers, struggling families, desperate criminals, and nobody could easily distinguish one from another. For many Romans, the most frightening realization was simple. The person who knew their life best might also be the person most capable of exploiting it. Of all the dangers Romans feared from their neighbors, none spread faster than fire. A thief might ruin one family. A rumor might destroy a reputation. But a fire could destroy an entire building. Most Roman apartment blocks were packed with wooden beams, furniture, fabrics, and oil lamps. Residents cooked meals in cramped rooms. Open flames burned constantly. One careless mistake could become a catastrophe. And because families lived so close together, everyone depended on their neighbor's caution. Unfortunately, caution was often in short supply. Imagine waking in the middle of the night to the smell of smoke. At first you think it is a dream. Then you hear shouting. A woman screams somewhere below. Feet pound against wooden stairs. Children begin crying. You rush to the doorway. Thick smoke fills the hallway. A lamp has overturned in a neighboring apartment. The fire is already spreading. In Rome's crowded insulae, disasters moved terrifyingly fast. A single neighbor's mistake could suddenly become your problem. And by then it was often too late. Upper-floor residents suffered the greatest fear. Many apartment buildings rose several stories high. The poorest citizens often occupied the highest levels. The staircases were narrow. Exits were limited. When fires erupted below, escape became difficult. Some families found themselves trapped. Others climbed onto rooftops hoping for rescue. In the darkness, panic spread faster than the flames themselves. People pushed, shouted, fought for survival. And every victim knew the tragedy had likely begun in somebody else's room. Not every fire was accidental. Ancient Rome was no stranger to revenge. When disputes became severe enough, some individuals sought destructive solutions. Historical records suggest that arson occasionally appeared as a weapon. A furious enemy might damage property. A bitter rival might seek retaliation. Even the rumor of intentional fire terrified residents. Nobody wanted to believe a neighbor could destroy dozens of homes over a personal grudge. Yet many Romans understood human anger all too well. Revenge took many forms beyond fire. Some neighbors vandalized property. Others spread devastating rumors. A few sabotaged businesses. A merchant might discover damaged merchandise. A craftsman could lose customers after false accusations. A landlord might face endless complaints orchestrated by enemies. The goal was simple: make life miserable. And because neighbors lived so close together, opportunities for retaliation existed everywhere. Every shared wall became a battleground. Every encounter carried tension. Every disagreement risked becoming something much worse. The crowded environment amplified every conflict. Today, people can often move away from troublesome neighbors. Ancient Romans rarely had that luxury. Housing was limited. Money was scarce. Many families remained trapped beside people they hated. Day after day, year after year, they shared hallways, water sources, courtyards, staircases. Avoidance became impossible. The enemy who insulted you yesterday might stand beside you tomorrow. The proximity turned ordinary disagreements into long-term nightmares. Sometimes violence erupted openly. An insult exchanged in public. A debt left unpaid. A stolen possession. A rumor repeated once too often. The spark could be almost anything. Witnesses described street fights, household disputes, and neighborhood confrontations throughout Roman history. Crowds gathered quickly. Some tried to intervene. Others simply watched. Violence became another unfortunate feature of urban life. And when the conflict involved neighbors, escape remained nearly impossible once the fight ended. Perhaps the most exhausting burden was uncertainty. Not every neighbor was dangerous. Many were hardworking people trying to survive. Some helped each other during emergencies. Others shared food or offered support. The problem was that nobody knew who could truly be trusted. The friendly face greeting you today might spread rumors tomorrow. The helpful neighbor might secretly envy your success. Every relationship carried risk. Every friendship contained doubt. And uncertainty has a way of wearing people down over time. As Rome grew larger, the problem only intensified. More people arrived every year. More buildings rose. More strangers became neighbors. The city created opportunities, wealth, and excitement. But it also created anonymity. People often knew surprisingly little about those living nearby. Behind every door existed a private world. Hidden ambitions. Hidden resentments. Hidden secrets. The immense city connected millions of people while simultaneously making trust more difficult than ever before. And nowhere was that contradiction more visible than among neighbors. So were Romans truly terrified of their neighbors? For many, the answer was yes. Not because every neighbor was evil. Not because every apartment hid a criminal. But because daily life placed ordinary people under extraordinary pressure. Crowded housing. Thin walls. Poverty. Crime. Rumors. Fire. Jealousy. Fear. All of these forces lived side by side within Rome's apartment blocks. The greatest threat was rarely some distant enemy beyond the city's walls. More often it was much closer, just a few feet away, listening through the wall, watching through a window, waiting behind a door. And that reality made life in ancient Rome far darker than most people imagine.